Hindus have actually suffered a highest fall in the employment rate. It has fallen the most for OBCs and SCs. The declines are over 6 percentage points each in both these communities. CSDS Lokniti in April, just before the election, came out with a survey result where they asked people on what are the main issues going into this election. And the most important issue there that they found was unemployment. Around 29% of the people surveyed thought that unemployment was the main reason that will decide their voting preference this time. The second most important issue was inflation. Around 23% people thought that was the most important one. So between the two of them, around 52% of the people surveyed thought these two issues were the most important factors before they decide who to vote. Now we looked at this number and we tried to understand how are these two issues sort of cutting across India in terms of caste and religious boundaries. And for that, we looked at both the official data on, say, inflation that the government comes out with, and we also looked at CMIE data to understand how different communities are affected by these two factors. Inflation basically is the rise in price level. How much does the general price level rise from one year to another? And this is something that really doesn't affect based on what is your religion or your caste. It does affect whether you're poor or rich. The poor get affected by inflation more than the rich because the poor don't have the capacity to deal with inflation. So we looked at the formal data, the official data. We tried to increase prices exactly how they have increased over the past 5 and 10 years, which are the period under the current government, and tried to understand what is the effect of inflation on a common person. And we have summarized this in a simple number. So typically you understand that if inflation increases by say 10%, if your income also increases by 10%, you're exactly at the same level. So we have tried to understand how much did the inflation increase over the last 5 years. So that number comes out to be 32%. So the general price level has gone up by 32%. And so a very good way for you to understand whether you're better off or worse off is to figure out whether your income, your salary has gone up by 32% or not. If it has not gone up by 32%, then you're worse off than 5 years ago. If it has gone up by more than that, then you are better off to that extent, that difference. Suppose your salary or income has gone up by 40%, then you're slightly better off than what you were 5 years ago. The number for 10 years ago is 64%. So, if your income has gone up by 64% since 2014, then you're at the same level or, slightly better off than what you were. If your income is below 64% increase, then you are worse off. So that gives you a sense of where you are. And it's important to understand this number because there's a lot of debate whether inflation is important or not important or how much inflation has affected us. And as I said, inflation does affect different people differently because of where they are in the economic scale and what you buy. Suppose if I don't buy a car, then car inflation or car related inflation doesn't affect me as much. But it's for you to understand that the general price level has gone up by 32% from 2019 and by 64% from 2014. And you can just look at your income levels and figure out whether you're better off or not. Unemployment, typically everywhere in the world, unemployment is measured by the unemployment rate. But to understand the true extent of distress that is there in the labor market, especially in a country like India, we have to look at both unemployment rate and employment rate. These are two different concepts and approach the same situation from a very different lens. Let me just very briefly explain to you how do we go about looking at this, especially from CMIE data, the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy data. So, think first of the fact that we have something called the working age population. Working age population is all the population above 15 years of age. Now, within this working age population, not everybody demands a job. Now, only the people who are demanding a job are called the labor force. So, say a woman who's 35 years old, a housewife, is not applying anywhere for a job, then she's not part of the labor force. Or a man who's 65 and has retired, doesn't want to do any further jobs, then they are not part of the labor force. So, there is working age population, then we come to the labor force, people who are demanding jobs. And then we calculate the unemployment rate. Unemployment rate is basically the number of people or the proportion of people in the labor force who are demanding a job but not getting it, right? So if, out of 100 people who are in the working age population, only 80 are demanding, and within that 80, only 40 are getting the jobs, we'll calculate the proportions accordingly. Now, there is a problem with unemployment rate. While it is a very good metric to look at unemployment issues across the world, in India, the problem is the labor force itself keeps dropping. It's falling. And it's a very negative trend that we have been seeing, which is basically saying that the proportion of people demanding a job has been coming down. And that could be for a variety of reasons. There could be people who might be so disillusioned that they may stop looking for a job, So, and there's millions of people, according to some estimates, who are in that category of people who stop looking for a job because they've been trying and they pull out of the demand for a job. So, instead of looking at unemployment rate, where unemployment rate would sometimes understate the stress in the situation because the denominator itself is falling, the labor force itself is falling. We look at employment rate. Employment rate is is a different measure. It basically looks at the total working age population, right? Everybody above 15 years of age, and how many are employed. So it cuts around the whole thing, whether you are demanding a job, not demanding a job, and whatever. You just look at the simple employment rate, how many people are employed above 15 years of age. And we can calculate both these metrics to better understand what is happening to different communities, different castes, different religious groups in India. So let's first look at how different religious communities performed on the unemployment stress. Where is the unemployment stress highest? Now, one data that we know is that labor force participation rate has fallen just about for everybody. If we look at the data for unemployment rates, which is the people who are not getting a jobs yet demanding it, we find that numbers have actually gone up for almost all communities. So for, say, Hindus, in 2016-17, the unemployment rate was 7.28, and it has now gone up to 8.07. So sort of almost a percentage point increase of 0.8. But the worst affected in this table, as you can see, are the Sikhs, where the number has actually gone up by 2.54 percentage points. So the Sikhs in 2016-17 had the lowest unemployment rate of the main religious communities, but that number has gone up quite significantly over the last 8 years. But that is only the unemployment rate. The more crucial metric for India is the employment rate, because the labor force participation rate keeps coming down. And if you look at that, it shows another layer of distress. So if you look at the employment rate, you'll find that Hindus have actually suffered a highest fall in the employment rate. In 2016-17, which is the earliest year for which we have the CMIE data, 43% was the employment rate amongst Hindus, and that has fallen to something like 37% in 2023-24, which is the year ending March this year. That's a fall of almost 6 percentage points. There has been a fall across main religious communities, Muslims, Christians, and Sikhs, and all of them have suffered a fall in the employment rate. So sort of the employment stress has been there all across the board. Now, if we look at employment rate according to castes within Hindus, Then we have table here which talks about the upper caste, the intermediate caste, the OBCs, SCs, and STs. The intermediate castes are castes like the Marathas, Jats, Gujars, who are often aspiring to be part of the included in the OBCs, but as yet they are not. Now here again the data shows that there is considerable stress again. The employment rate has fallen across the board. It has fallen the most for OBCs and SCs. The declines are over 6 percentage points each in both these communities. But the lowest, if we don't look at the decline, if we just look at the absolute amount of employment rate, then the lowest employment rate is for upper caste Hindus. So that provides you some sense of where the different the stress in employment is across India, if we look at religious and caste differences. The bigger point here is that both unemployment and inflation are things which have affected just about everybody in the country. And this is why perhaps the CSDS and Lokniti's survey has found that these are two issues which are at the top of everybody's mind when they're going for the elections. If you want to know more about this data, want to know more about these tables, you can click on the link given in the description, and there's much more analysis available in the online section. Thank you for watching the Indian Express.